Hi, today we are doing the probably most unuseful comparison video ever, because today we are comparing the Sony A7S III against the Canon M50. Coming up. Hi, my name is Roger, and on this channel we talk about cameras, tech gear and videography. And during this video, if you like it, please hit that thumbs up button. Thank you. Now, like I said, today we are comparing the Sony A7S III against the Canon M50. And on paper, there is probably no contest. The big winner here will be the Sony A7S III. But the point I'm trying to make with this video is that even though the Sony A7S III, as highly talked about that this camera is, the small and older Canon M50, it might not be that bad of a camera if you're just starting out. First, let's just talk about the form factor of the two cameras. The Sony A7S III is a much bigger and bulkier camera than the Canon M50, and there is a reason for that. There is a 12 megapixel full frame sensor inside of the Sony A7S III, while in the Canon M50 we have a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor. The Sony A7S III, it has in-body image stabilization. That means that the sensor inside of the camera, it moves around. And for the sensor to be able to move around, you need a bigger space. While in the Canon M50, the sensor, it's locked on. It doesn't move. You only have digital image stabilization inside of the Canon M50. There's also a significant size difference when it comes to the batteries of the two cameras. The Sony A7S III has a much bigger and bulkier battery than the Canon M50. And that's also a reason why the Sony camera is bigger than the Canon camera. Now, I don't like leaving the sensors open like this for a longer amount of time. So before we put the lenses back onto the cameras, the Sony A7S III, it has a full frame E lens mount, while the Canon M50, it has an APS-C EF-M lens mount. So there is a size difference when it comes to the lens mount also. Both of these cameras comes with a fully articulated flip out screen. Most of the new cameras nowadays have this fully articulated flip out screen. Canon has implemented this flip out screen on all their new cameras. Canon M50 Mark II, Canon EOS R, R5, R6, R3, all these cameras have this fully articulated flip out screen, while Sony has just only now starting to implement this flip out screen. The Sony A7S III has this, the Sony ZV-1 has the flip out screen, Sony ZV-10, and I bet that the Sony A7IV will have the flip out screen, but Sony didn't put the flip out screen on the flagship Sony A1, so one might wonder why that is. But I think you can expect the fully articulated flip out screen on most of the new cameras that's coming out in the nearest future. Both of these cameras have the capability to connect stuff to it. Sony A7S III, it does have more connection ports than the Canon M50 does, but both cameras has an HDMI output. It is a full-size HDMI on the Sony A7S III, but on the Canon M50 it's a micro HDMI output. On the Sony A7S III, there is a ton of buttons that you can customize to do whatever you want, while on the Canon M50 you don't have that many options when it comes to buttons. It's like what you see is what you get. When it comes to memory, the Canon M50, it has one memory card slot, while the Sony A7S III, it has two. The Canon M50, it only takes regular SD cards, while in the Sony A7S III you can use SD UHS-2 cards, and you can also use CF Express Type A cards. But you need this to be able to utilize all the specs that the Sony A7S III has to offer. If we take a look at the different specs of the two cameras, here, like I said, the Sony A7S III, it's the big winner of the two, and it should be. The price difference between these two cameras is enormous, and this is a beginner camera, this is a professional camera. The Canon M50, it has an APS-C sensor, it records in 8-bit 420, while the Sony A7S III, it has a full frame sensor, it records 10-bit 422 all the way up to 120 frames per second in 4K. The Canon M50, it also records in 4K, but you lose the dual pixel autofocus, or you only get a contrast based autofocus in 4K, and it has a big crop while recording in 4K. You can shoot up to 120 frames per second in the Canon M50, but that is only 720p. But on the Sony A7S III, you can film in 4K all the way up to 120 frames per second with no crop. When it comes to autofocus, both cameras actually have great autofocus. The M50 uses Canon's dual pixel autofocus. It is the older version of the dual pixel autofocus. You don't get the new version like you do in the Canon EOS R6 and R5, but it's really capable nonetheless. The autofocus on the Sony A7S III, it's really up to par with Canon's dual pixel autofocus. So when it comes to autofocus, both cameras does a great job. So when we're talking about video specs, the Sony A7S III is going to win over the Canon M50 all day long. But talking about photography, the Canon M50, it has 24 megapixel sensor, while the Sony A7S III, it only has 12 megapixels. So I did take both of these two cameras outside and I filmed some short video clips, and I did take some photos with both cameras. So now I'm gonna play that footage to you, and let's see if you can distinguish between the two cameras. So, what do you think? Could you see any difference between the Sony A7S III and the Canon M50 that I'm filming on right now? As you can see, this picture actually looks quite good, doesn't it? This camera is now filming in 1080p full HD, that is 25 frames per second, with the Sigma 18 to 35 millimeter lens at an f1.8. Of course, the lens has something to do with getting shallow depth of field, but nonetheless, it is attached to the Canon M50, and the image is quite usable. You can use this for your own YouTube channel if that's what you're into, and the camera is also a really good photography camera. Now, I'm not doing this video because I want to hype up the Canon M50. I'm only using the Canon M50 because this is a lower end starting up camera that has been really popular in the last years. So if you have a lower end entry level camera and you're looking up at the Canon EOS R5 or the Sony A7S III and thinking, I need that camera to be able to make it on YouTube or to make good quality videos, you do get better specs, but you don't need to buy the higher end camera. you're more than capable to making good videos or photos with the camera that you already have. That's it for me. Hope you liked this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel if you like the content that I'm making, and yeah, maybe I will see you in another video. Bye.